Welcome to a bonus episode of Life in Film. If you enjoyed this episode, please review and share this podcast. It makes a huge difference. We're also on Patreon, TikTok, Instagram, if you'd like to support us and get more content. Our guest has overcome the huge feat of getting his feature film debut off the ground, which he's not only directed, but he's written from speck. American Murderer stars Tom Pelphrey, who gives a monster lead performance, with a supporting cast including Phillippe and Jacki Weaver. Based on the shocking true story of Jason Dereck Brown, almost 20 years later, he's still in the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. Our guest today is Matthew Gentile. American Murderer is out now.
Hi there, Elliot. How are you?
Hey, Matthew. How's it going?
Good. Glad we can make this happen.
Good to see you now.
Hi.
How's it going?
I'm good, man. I'm good.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for reaching out. I really appreciate that you wanted to come on and chat about this movie, and I'm really excited that it's a good movie. Watching it, I mean, it's one of those things. Sometimes you watch something and you think, oh, it's okay, but this was I really enjoyed this, and it surprised me because, as I said in my first email to you, I'd already seen the trailer, and it was something I wanted to see regardless. And then obviously when you expressed interest in coming in the podcast, I was like, oh, brilliant. This is a film I wanted to watch anyway. So
Great.
I feel really privileged to have seen it early and really enjoyed it. And I mean, obviously you've written this and you've directed it and you did a short version before you did the feature. How did the interest for, obviously I didn't know anything about this character and this story, and I was absolutely blown away that it's a true story. How did you come across it?
Yeah, well, it's a funny story. First off, thank you for the kind words and thank you for having me. I love your interviews, and so that's why I reached out.
It's all good, man.
I think you do a great film journalism, and you interviewed my good friend and fellow filmmaker Julian Higgins recently.
Yeah.
He went to AFI. He's actually the reason I went to film school at AFI.
Right.
The first time I applied, I didn't get in. I came really close. I think it was just there. And Julian's film Thief was all over his short film Thief was all over the festival circuit. He won every award known to man for it. And I reached out to him. I was like, hey buddy, I loved your film. How was AFI for you? And he told me, whatever you do, make sure you get yourself into that school, whatever you got to do, because it's worth it. And I'm really glad he said that to me, because I kept, I persisted. The next year I applied and I got in. So anyways, that's a shout out to Julian. Now I'll answer your question, which is how did I come across American Murderer? And the answer is it actually goes back to childhood. When I was 14, before I wanted to be a filmmaker, I actually wanted to be an FBI agent. So I basically wanted to be Phillippe's character in this movie. I was obsessed with the FBI's top 10 fugitives list, as kids are. And it was interesting because the crime happened in 2004. I was around 13 or 14. And the FBI top 10 list, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's quite interesting. You have a sea of menacing faces. You have Osama bin Laden, Whitey Bulger. This is back then, of course. Now they've both been caught, but they stayed on that list for a while. And you have a lot of menacing, sophisticated criminals. And then, sure enough, there was this surfer dude with spiky blonde hair from Southern California named Jason Dereck Brown, who, had allegedly committed first-degree murder and armed robbery. So his wanted poster, kind of struck me just because his face didn't seem to fit in with the rest of the guys. So I remembered the face, just, an image. And then, you cut to 14 years later, I'm graduating from film school at the AFI. I'm trying to figure out what my first feature is. I'm kind of in that existential post-film school rut where you're like, because anyone who's gone to film school knows if you make a short that, luckily enough opens some doors for you. The first question anybody asks is, what's your future? And I had a few different kind of pet projects that were like getting, some traction, but then not, and false starts and whatever. And I realized that if I wanted to do a first feature that felt specific to me and what I wanted to say, I'd have to write it myself. And so I was like, I went to AFI for directing, and I was like, now I've got to educate myself really hard on screen. Because that's the way I'm going to be able to break in. And, I should say with a caveat, there's tons of ways to break in, but for me it was writing, and and realizing that I had to write. So I was thinking, like, what's that first feature look like? And then all of a sudden one day I was storyboarding for a shoot. I was doing a commercial, and whenever I storyboard, I always have my TV on in the background, like, it'll be like CNBC or, some true crime stuff or whatever. And I'm drawing out some shots, and all of a sudden Jason's face popped on the television. And it was like, it was literally like I was walking around in my head going, what's my first feature? And then boom, Jason Dereck Brown's face popped on the TV and kind of, looked at me. And I turned the volume up and I was like, this is interesting. What went on here? And then I saw that it had been 14 years and he was still missing. And I was just immediately captivated and struck by, the documentary he was on was called American Greed, which I recently interviewed on. And what was interesting about that piece in particular, there were a lot, Jason's story was covered everywhere. Dateline, American Greed, tons of newspapers. It was a huge case at the time it happened, but they really got into it with, like, they interviewed, Ryan Phillippe's character, Lance Lysing. They interviewed some people who are composite characters and portrayed in the movie. And I was really struck immediately by how Jason Dereck Brown, here was this, fairly good-looking guy who portrayed himself as wealthy and, made himself look like a businessman and came off totally legit to a lot of people. But he meant so many different things to so many different people. And that was just really interesting to me, how this guy could, to one person be a lover, to one person be, the hunted, right? The prey, to another person be the con man ripping them off, to another person be like their hero, the other person, their little brother, right? Who they're just trying to take care of. And all these different things that he meant just really sparked my interest because, on the surface, it had everything I love in a movie. I became a filmmaker because my favorite movie growing up was Dog Day Afternoon. So I saw it when I was 12.
Choice.
Yeah, I saw it when I was 12, and I kind of said to my dad, I was like, I want more movies like that. I love stories of antiheroes. I love true stories. I love crime stories, all that, gangster. Most kids my age were into Pokemon. I was into gangsters, criminals, and con men. So that was my thing, right? And, American Murderer, though, it kind of came to me. So, like, on the surface, it had all those things. But really, I think what made it a movie and a story that I felt I needed to tell and fight for years of my life was, this is a movie about someone who, it's just much about Jason Dereck Brown as it is about the people who knew him and who loved him. And so it's seeing him through all these different perspectives that really started to get me excited about telling this story.
And finding, straight away, like within the first couple of scenes, I guess it's without giving anything away to the audience that haven't seen it, seeing the performance from Tom Pelphrey, where he can basically, his charisma, his lies and everything else can be, believable. And the audience is, but actually at the beginning, you're on side. What was the process like finding, your murderer, essentially?
Well, that's a great question. And, the credit goes to Tom Pelphrey because I think he gives I love this whole cast and I think they're all great. And, it all hinges on Jason, right? It's all about, every scene is about Jason Dereck Brown, right? Even if he's not in it. So, it is all about him. And I think Tom really carries the movie on his shoulders because it's exactly what you said. When I first was casting this role, there were a lot of names that were kind of thrown around. Tom came into the process actually pretty late because I didn't really know his work very well until my producer Gia Walsh called me and said, "Are you watching Ozark?" Which was right when we were casting the film in March 2020. So the world had shut down. We didn't know when our start date would be. And, the script was in a strong place. It was, getting some attention. The producers were sending it around and getting interest. But Tom kind of came in and popped on the radar, so to speak. And in the same day, my producer Gia Walsh calls me and says, "Hey, this guy Tom Pelphrey is amazing." 3 other people call me, including my brother, the composer, and my best friend is a talent agent. So I had these 3 kind of pings at the same time saying, "Look at Tom Pelphrey for your movie." People had read the script and knew it quite well. And, when I saw him on Ozark in the opening scene, I was immediately struck by just how he was so, like, Tom was so physical as an actor. The person he reminded me of the most, my favorite filmmaker, is Kurosawa. Therefore, my favorite leading man is Toshiro Mifune. And Tom had something that reminded me of that, where there was a quote Kurosawa said about Toshiro Mifune, where he said, Toshiro Mifune could do in 5 seconds what would take most actors 3 minutes. And I felt that about Tom because I knew that Jason needed a few things. He needed to be charismatic. That's number one, right? Like every pitch material for this movie says, a charismatic comment. So he had to be charismatic. He had to be physical. He had to have that kind of dynamism because it is a physical role. So doing pull-ups on the boat, right? So I knew I needed someone like that. I knew I needed someone who could be scary and unpredictable, right? And could basically convey every mood because he has to, he's like an actor. He has to go through all that and get himself there. But something that Tom was really helpful with when we finally did cast him, and I think, and he loved the script and he really liked my shorts, and I know he was excited about doing it, but at first he had some reservations because the script originally, before we went out to shoot, and this is why I think actors, really great actors like Tom or Ryan or Dina or Jacki or Chantel or Moises, they kind of like become co-writers when they work with you. You have your script and you have a vision of it. But the script, I remember before we shot, had a lot of kind of like almost moments where Jason was sort of winking at the audience a little, or like not even like not breaking the fourth wall necessarily, but there were just moments where you saw he was like kind of satisfied getting one over on somebody. And that's a funny thing about like action lines or prose lines in screenplays, is sometimes you write things to like keep a reader going. But when it comes to an actor, they kind of are like, why, am I smiling here? Or maybe I'm doing this. And that was something Tom was really phenomenal at, was he was really working, and we worked on, we did a lot of Zooms where we would talk about the script. I'd cut all the action lines out because I saw they weren't, some of them were like telling him what to do or how to play the scene. I didn't want to do that. And we would just, talk about the lines and what's underneath them. And we always found, something Tom, I think, the reason why his performance is so strong in the film is he never looked at Jason as a sociopath. He never said, I'm going to play him like this monster man or anything like that. I think he saw Jason as a wounded, immature man-child. And that was kind of the take he did and ran with. And so he, in every scene of the movie, I think Tom is really playing the desperation, not that Jason's crazy, right? But he's desperate. Now that might make him do crazy things, right? That might make him do sociopath things, but in his mind, he's not seeing it that way. And I think that's, the beauty of when you have a great actor like Tom Pelphrey or any of them, they're not judging their characters. They're really in it, and they're playing the emotional and the human truth of the situation. And I think that's why Tom's so good in the film, and just he understood Jason very well. And when he came to set on day one, the first thing we shot was the boat party scene, which is a pretty wild scene. That actually is real footage. We kind of like recreated that a little.
Oh wow!
From a real video that exists, that's been around on some of the programs that I got to see, and it was pretty wild to see. Like the first day he arrived, I was like, wow, he's Jason. He got it. I was like, I don't have to worry about him. And I really didn't have to worry about any of them. I mean, this was such a strong cast. Like, Jacki Weaver, someone like that, is coming in and playing a small part, and she's a 2-time Oscar nominee, and she just was, these actors were so on their game. It was I just kind of had to, as a first-time director, step up and do my job well.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on that a little bit there, but how is that when you have like someone like a 2-time Oscar-nominated actress, and you've got someone like Tom Pelphrey who's like really on his way up, Ryan Phillippe, these people that know from also your past. What is that like going on set and going, well, I'm directing them, and is it kind of a little bit odd? I'm doing that for the first time with these sort of giants of the screen.
Well, imposter syndrome is real. And I think it definitely kicks in when you make your first movie, for sure. I think if it doesn't, there might be something wrong, or maybe some people are just super confident and they don't have that. But it's real. I mean, I felt very lucky to have these people. I mean, it kind of would keep getting better and better. First we got Tom, it was like, oh my God, we got the guy. Then it was Ryan, it was like, oh my God, we got Ryan Phillippe to do this. Then, Jacki Weaver, I remember my producers, when they gave me notes on one version of the script, were like, they were giving notes on that specific scene. It was a lot shorter. And they were like, if you beef this scene up and you really like make it, hurt. I had great producers who give great notes like that. Fortunately, which is very fortunate, because that's not always the case, as we know. And they gave really great notes. And one of my producers said, great scenes cut and hurt. And if you can write a scene with Jacki, with the mom, that really hurts, I think you can get Jacki Weaver to do this. And I thought he was crazy. I said, Jacki Weaver for this small part in a first-time director's film? You're nuts, Kevin. That's not gonna happen. And then sure enough, we offered it to her and she said yes. And I think, part of it was also like we were shooting, we shot the movie, December 2020, early 2021. So we were like in the thick of COVID and the pandemic. I saw the film with Ryan the other night on Saturday at the Newport Beach Film Festival. We had our West Coast premiere. And Ryan said to me, I think that the energy of us all being so hungry to work because we were locked up really comes off in your movie. And I was like, I think he's absolutely right. But no, working with Jacki, she was, all of them really were I found quite trusting of me as the director, which I was like a little bit like, okay, you know, like I said, there was no egos on this set. There was no prima donnas. It was really like everyone was just happy to be there and working and getting to work on their craft. You know, but every actor has a different language, I've found in my limited directing experience from shorts to this, that, you know, every actor requires certain things. And, you know, they are all, everyone in this cast, I think from, you know, really like the whole cast was just really talented, but, you know, figuring out what each one needs to help them, that's kind of how I saw my job. You know, and there's a great quote about directing from Barry Jenkins I just recently heard, where he said, it was beautiful. I had to like write it down because I was like listening to it on a podcast on a run. And he said, I always thought directing was about being powerful, but then I realized it was actually about being powerless. And I thought that was really beautiful, he said. Like, I don't think you could say it much better than that. Because, you know, us directors, we want to control everything. We want to control all the elements. We want to control all the, you know, but you can't. You know, there's this thing is kind of happening. You know, story is being told. It's unfolding. It's coming to life. You know, and I prepared for this movie, like, you know, as much as I could. I pre-visualized a lot of it. I storyboarded the whole shoot. You know, I had everything planned to a T. And when you make a movie like this on a tight schedule and a tight budget, which has some, you know, action elements and things like that, you have to plan a lot. But at the end of the day, though, what the planning did was it allowed us to be very organic and let these actors really come in and just blow things up and elevate the material. And I think I think every single actor in this cast elevated their role beyond what was there. I would argue.
I think as well, it helps. Well, personally, I think it helps for the cast to have someone that's written and directing something, because then they know that there's one destination. You know, right. you know what you're sailing towards. And there's also, for you, unluckily, you're the one point of reference to ask all the questions. Right. So I'm sure, but that gives them, I think that gives a sense point. Of like, you know where this is going. You've got a clear vision, and that I think can really help.
That's a great point, you know, and it was actually funny because now I am like, you know, after I finished making the movie, I kind of said to myself, I was like, oh my God, I can never imagine directing someone else's script. Like, I'm going to have to write my own scripts because I can't imagine it, like how that must feel, you know, with the division. But, you know, it is interesting. I said that for a while, and then someone sent me a script that I absolutely loved. And I was like, oh, I'd love to direct this, you know. And so I would be interested in some days directing. You know, I love how, you know, a lot of my favorite directors do both, right? Some of my favorite directors just write and direct their own material, like, you know, Paul Thomas Anderson and Quentin Tarantino and West, a lot of them, and then some, you know, take on a bunch of different scripts. Like, you know, you look at Scorsese or Spielberg, right? Those guys like, you know, do everything. Or you know, or Catherine Bigelow's like one of the best directors, and I don't think she writes any of her scripts, maybe one or two, but you know, she works with great writers. So I'd love to work with great writers someday, you know, because I don't want to get too, I think as a writer director, you can get precious. That's dangerous. But, you know, in this phase of my career where I'm starting out, you know, it is nice to, be that one that people can come to and be the god of the universe, because, you know, especially if you're doing a true story, like you're the research source. And, you know, I researched the screenplay for a very long time I think I researched it for 6 to 8 months before I actually sat down to write a word. So, you know, I have a pretty slow process where I really like get as much information as I can so I can, you know, provide details, like things like down to like the clothes these characters wear are pretty like, you know, things like that. And we did go off. It was not the most, it definitely I wouldn't say it's the most historically accurate movie, but it's more to research to get that immersion, you know, for an audience. So yeah, there is definitely power to it. But at the same time, you know, I think a lot of great directors take scripts that they don't write and make it their own completely, or collaborate, you know, right, with the writer well. I always point to The Social Network, which I think is my favorite movie of the 2010s. I know I'm not that original.
Brilliant, Tom.
Yeah, I know I'm not original in saying that, but I love that documentary where you see Sorkin and Fincher. I assume you've seen it.
I haven't. Is there a documentary about the behind?
Check it out, man. It's on YouTube. It's like a 2 hour. It's like a 2.5 hour thing that they did. And thank God they did this. I don't know who like in the studio approved it, but it's amazing because you really see Fincher and Sorkin like in rehearsals with Andrew Garfield. And,
oh wow!
And they're so young, right? And like you did these amazing actors, like and even Justin Timberlake, you see them like chatting with him and like, you know, about Sean Parker, and it really, you see Fincher and Sorkin like arguing and like collaborating, and it's really great, you know. And I think film, at the end of the day, film's a very, very collaborative medium. You know, whether you are what they call an auteur or not, you know, like any director has to be. super collaborative because, you know, you're all working together to tell the same stories. So yeah, there's all kinds of exciting ways to do it, but I do love writing. So,
well, if you're willing, I'd love to talk about the process of, obviously you had your short film and then you wrote the feature version of the script, but for people listening to this, and partly for me as well, I've written a feature film, and I'd love to know the inside track of what is the process. So was the first thing writing it, or did you line up producers? What was the process from the start?
I'll share my brushstrokes for sure. So, you know, it took a long time. My journey will be a story of how it took a long time, and the moral of it is battle of attrition. You know, anyone I know who's made a first feature, and I include Julian in this, Chloe Okuno, who's also AFI, like she just had her film Watcher come out. My good friend Max Barbacow was my classmate, made Palm Springs, which is a great film. You know, anyone I know who's made a debut, for the most part, there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, it's taken a long time, sometimes years. You know, in my case, it was 4 or 5. I know like a lot of them is longer, some of them are shorter. So, you know, it takes time. For me, like I said, I graduated film school. I was figuring out what that first feature was, you know, and like my short films that were kind of going around the circuits of the festivals, you know, I was lucky enough to have them win some awards and all that, but, you know, nothing concrete was coming out of that. And my mentality always was, nobody's really going to offer you a directing job, right? So I wrote American Murderer at first just on spec. Like I just wrote it on my own time, as one does with, you know, I still write screenplays on spec. I do some higher jobs sometimes, but mostly it's me writing, you know, on spec and originating it from scratch. And what happened with American Murder was I started writing it. We're talking like 2018 era, you know, early 2018. And I was lucky in that I had a connection to this great actor, Jonathan Groff. I used to work in the mailroom at William Morris Endeavor before I went to AFI. And I one of the great jobs we had in the mailroom was we got to tape actors and in their auditions. So that was really a directing class for me. I got to, like, you know, they would ask me for feedback, and Jonathan was one of the extremely talented actors I was lucky enough to tape. And I thought he was great for the role in this movie. And so I spoke with him about it. He seemed very interested. You know, he said, send me the script when it's ready, which is a big, you know, lesson I'll hammer over you and any listeners' heads is, you know, always make sure you send a script when you feel it's 100% ready. Like, you know, I've made that mistake before where I've sent it too early, but I sent it to him after like working on it for 5 months, got it to him. He really did like it, and he, you know, wanted to do it. His team was a little less, you know, excited at the time his career was taking off. He was, you know, he was in the show Mindhunter, which was huge on Netflix, and Fincher, and, you know, was really operating at a high level. But, you know, he was generous enough to do a proof of concept short with me, where what we did was we took one scene from the script and shot it. And, you know, this was not a traditional short film, I should say, in that, like, you know, I think a great short film, you know, that, like, say, wins Sundance or any big festival, they normally like tell a story, right? And they like have a kind of payoff joke. I think short films are as hard as features. I really do. I compare a short film to me as like writing a haiku, whereas a feature is like a novel, right? And you have a lot more space and time to explore. So I find shorts very hard. And while my shorts did, you know, do open a lot of doors for me and win awards, and I think they are well crafted, I never made a great short film. I made a great small feature trailer, right? I made great small feature trailers because that's what I was always trying to get to. So for this proof of concept short, what I specifically wanted to do, at the advice of a very smart industry colleague of mine, I wanted to take one scene, shoot it really well, have music sound good, right? Get the tone across so that it could help be a calling card for my script. Because what I was finding was it was really hard to get my screenplay read by people. You know, the gatekeepers, you know, because the fact is, and I was one of them, right? I was an assistant at William Morris, you know, in 2014. So 2014. So I knew how hard it was to get scripts read, because I used to sit on those desks, and I knew what it would be like to have 10 scripts in a queue, and you have to read them that week. And, you know, I also worked as a script reader after that. So, you know, during this era, I was working as a script reader for multiple places to support myself while I was writing. So, you know, I knew how hard it was. So, you know, it's hard to get people just to crack a thing open. So having something like a proof of concept, especially if you're directing it, Like if you're trying to break in as a screenwriter, that's a different game. But if you're trying to direct your own indie feature, having that proof of concept could really help as a calling card. And it really did for me, because once that proof of concept dropped online just on IMDb as a thing that Jonathan Groff was in, all of a sudden people started getting very interested in the project. And I had a lot of people reaching out to me. There were some people then that wanted the script, but not me to direct it. Shocker. Because it was you've seen it, so it's an ambitious first movie. And I kind of realized that as I was writing it, but I said, okay, I was like, that's fine. And it'll take longer, but that's okay. Because I think, I'm a believer that the first movie, and again, there's millions of ways to do it. Some people they go 10K movie, 100K movie, and they build their way up. And for me, I wanted to, I was like, I feel like you only get to make your first feature once. So I'm not saying it's going to be perfect or the great masterpiece of my career. I certainly would hope not, but I want it to be something I really feel like I cared and thought about. Like I want to really come in as strong as I can, as I feel that I can.
Can I ask you just when you're talking about it, in terms of, because it does feel really ambitious and it feels like it has a decent budget, it obviously has a great cast. Are you able to sort of give us a ballpark on how much the film cost?
I can. That's my one area I can't answer the budget. Yeah, I'll say it was a tight schedule, and not as much as the books.
Not as much as like, but that's the main thing though, that a first time director and writer, and seeing something like this, it feels big. It feels like it's got a really decent budget. So you've obviously done something right there. But fair enough. Fair enough.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I would tell you if I could, but I can't. A few years from now, I'll tell you. I'll come to England. We'll have a beer, and I'll
yeah.
You're in London, right?
Yeah, London.
Yeah. So I'll pass by London. I'll tell you at the pub. But no. So So the script, was kind of like in this limbo, and I was getting interest, which was good. And then two companies converged on me at the same time. One was called GG Films, ran by the great Gia Walsh. She produced Zola, actually was going off to shoot it right around this time I'm talking about. And she was doing that with A24 at the time, and she got really into it and into me as a director. She'd seen my shorts. And then this other company, Traveling Picture Show, ran by Kevin Matasow and Carissa Buffel, they kind of, all these three producers came on, at the same time and banded together and backed me and optioned the script for me, and we were doing rewrites on it for about a year before we went out to cast it right in March of 2020.
And that's with the producers all kind of having their input, and did they bring anyone else in, or was it just they were tweaking what you'd already done and then you tweak it? And
they were giving me notes, I was giving them drafts, and that was a process, where I really, I credit that with teaching, because after that I also started getting writing gigs. And I credit that was my my screenwriting school. My film school was AFI for directing. My screenwriting school was reading scripts, and doing coverage, which I did for years, literally up until the shoot. And then I even went back up during some points after post, and doing that and reading scripts for people and writing and taking notes from these guys, because that's what taught me how to really, write a screenplay that could have all the things that a movie needs, and I felt really lucky that I had that, because, what was great about my process was I never really felt like they were trying to make a different movie than me. I felt like they were just trying to make a better version of what I had written. Right. And so, I think that's something really important to have in a producer, is a producer, just like in a director with an actor. An actor is always grateful, usually, when you give them some kind of adjustment, not necessarily a note, but an adjustment or something. Like very often I find actors will thank you for pushing them that extra step, right? Because that makes them feel safe, like they're being, watched. And I love that about, and I think that's the same with all collaborators. Cinematographer, like she'll tell me if my shot is too, it's like, no one's going to get that, that's not translating. It's not in this head of the character, an editor, right, does something similar. And I think a good producer, really, these producers really help push the project further. And, when people, the first thing I always get asked in every interview, and I think this one was that too, right, is, wow, great cast for a first feature. And I think that the reason for that is because I think the screenplay was worked on for such a long time and really had the chance to cook and thicken and develop as a soup. So by the time we really gave it out, people were interested in it, because it felt, deliberate and intentional. There was a restraint, it had all those things that I think was attracting these amazing people to come. And so that's the power of development. Now it can go the wrong way. I've seen that where, people lose their vision or kind of lose sight of it, but that didn't happen with this. And it didn't really happen at any point, I think, because once again, I had producers who really trusted me and believed in me as the director of the movie, as well as the writer. They're like, we believe, Mathew can do this. So that was pretty great,
Well, they do say, don't they, that if, obviously it sounds so simple, but writing a great part, an actor is going to read it and think, that's a great part, I want to do it.
Right.
But as you say, the tricky thing is actually getting that script on the desk of the right people to get it to that person in the first place. But it's a very interesting process, because everyone I have on it, including Julian, all the guests that I've had, it's always slightly different. You take a little bit from each one of them and you think, okay, that's a good, interesting way of doing it. I would love to see the short version of this film as well. Where can I find that, and where can the audience find that?
I can send it to you. I think I had it publicly. It's going to be on the Blu-ray.
Great. Okay.
So I'm excited about that. It's going to be on the Blu-ray DVD. I got to find a way to release it online somehow. It was on my website for a long time. It might still be there, but I'm not sure. I might have had to password protect it, but I'll send it to you.
Yeah, that would be great.
I'm sure it'll get up there at some point. Depending on how interested people get. But
for everyone else, though,
it's cool.
Buy the Blu-ray.
Yeah, exactly. Buy the Blu-ray and you'll get it. It's the SWAT invasion sequence in the movie. That's the scene we did. Just picked an easy one.
So
and,
that sounds
it's all
quite,
it's all done in one shot.
Oh wow!
It was done in one take. At the time, I was very into oneers, and then there's still some oneers in the movie, but I kind of chilled on that a little. It's cool. I'll shoot it over to you.
Yeah, no, great. And where you talk about, you were very into oneers, and the way just made me think the way this was shot. Your cinematographer, was it very collaborative in the way that you wanted this to look? Was there a particular kind of way that you wanted to go before you started shooting? You say you obviously did a lot of the storyboards, which is obviously a huge influence on the way a film's going to look. So what was that collaboration like?
Absolutely. Well, Kalila Robinson, my cinematographer, we worked together for a long time. We started working together at AFI.
Oh wow! Okay, that's great.
She did my short Lawman, and it was actually her short that because I graduated, I kind of had two thesis films from AFI. One was Frontman, that was my first one, and that one kind of played a lot of festivals and whatnot. And then because it did very well, I won a student Emmy, I got hired by AFI to come back and do a second thesis because someone the year below me had dropped out. And that was Kalila's short. And it was a Western that she had been for years trying to get made about Bass Reeves, the first African-American U.S. deputy in the Wild West, who, has a crazy story that's also been covered a lot. And I think they're now doing a TV show about it. But Kalila and I did that as her thesis, and I directed it. And so we've discovered we worked extremely well together, just had a natural rapport, all of that. We did tons of things since then. She did the proof of concept as well. And, Khalil is extremely talented, extremely intelligent, and complements me very well. Like we see things differently, and that's part of why I think we make a good team. Like she hates the Social Network.
Really?
She doesn't. Yeah, we argue.
She's gonna get a lot of hate for that.
all the time. No, she doesn't hate it. She doesn't hate it. What it is she thinks it's not as good as 7. And I'm like, that's a fair argument because 7 is also a masterwork. But
all of Fincher's work is just. I can't even really pick a weak one that I just love them all. Even Alien 3.
Agree. Right. Even Alien 3 has some good stuff in it. No, yeah, he is such a master craftsman. Tom had worked with him on Mank.
Of course,
and explained why he was such a genius, because he's just the guy can see. He's like X-ray vision. He can just see everything. But Kalila, and we really get on, but we also argue a lot, and we question things, and but the way we prepared for the movie was we actually, so every time I'm like finished with the script, even in a draft, I kind of while I'm like, because it always takes time to get notes, so I will go, and I'm doing this now, the script that I'm working on as my next film, and I will just type up a list of all the shots in the movie. And I kind of learned that from a David Lean interview I saw when I was like 16. Or David Lean's my other favorite director. So go Britain. But David Lean said that was always surprised because he typed up the list of shots and he gave them to people to like look at and talk about. And so I've always done that. Just type up a list of everything. It's very wordy. It's like paragraph, form. And Khalila then looks at it and she's like, I don't understand what any of this means. And then we talk and we go through each one. And I explained them to her. I had to talk through it. And then she adds shots, right? Or she's like, well, what if we get a long shot here? She always wants to go wider, right? She's like, what do we get a wider shot there to really show the landscape of? I'm like, yes. And so it kind of becomes a thing that we co-author. And then what I do is off our conversations, I go out and I draw it badly with like stick figures, colored pencils, right? But
in my head, it was like this beautiful Monet type,
Yeah, it's they have that on the special features too. They did all our storyboards, but then I'll draw the whole movie out. Like I just go all the way through and draw every cut, every shot as I see it, rudimentary, and then we look at it together. And we look at it and we refine it and we talk about it. And then another thing we kind of added as a second layer to this, and this was a COVID thing, but my editor, Matt Allen, he had won this Sim Brennan Fellowship, and he had gotten his hands on this amazing software called Shop Pro, where you could like build sets in 3D, take a camera and roam around. And because one thing I'll say as another advice piece to fellow aspiring directors and screenwriters is, it can be a lot of time before your movie takes off, and you can lose, because directing is a muscle. And so you kind of have to, and I think Julian talked about this, I think on your podcast, you have to find ways to practice, and I did something similar to him where we both like worked with kind of like actors who were not in the movie on scenes to really stage them, get them up on their feet and just practice the muscle of directing, because directing and writing are very related, but they are different, and it's harder to practice directing, right? It's easy to practice writing because you can do it. I mean, it's not easy, but you can do it every day, no matter what. Practicing directing, you need actors or something, right? So, but Matt Allen, my editor, thank God for him, because in May of 2020, he won this thing, he got the software. And so he said to me, he was like, look, while we're like in this limbo waiting for this movie to possibly happen, why don't we just start take your storyboards and make them actually like something people can look at. And so we did like 3D animatics of like all the major set pieces, from like the armored truck heist to the SWAT invasion to the stunts, the tackles, all of that stuff. And so then some things like even the interrogations, where we just wanted to make sure they didn't look boring and flat, right?
Yeah.
So, it was about just beefing, just letting it the prep get richer and deeper and more. And, so visually we were pretty thought out. And Khalila, what's great about her also, she talks a lot about concepts. So there were just things we kind of came up with, like, the look of Jason, how it would progress over the movie. So at the beginning of the film, Jason is colorful, vibrant, flashy, the camera's moving fast. We looked at like, Wolf of Wall Street, right? Or like, even like Catch Me If You Can, the happy parts where the camera's moving a lot and it's like fast and it's vibrant. It's, the color saturated, the nightclub, like Jason's on top. And then we talked about how as the movie progressed and things start getting worse and worse for him, like we kind of lose that color. It becomes bleaker and darker, and, moments we chose to use handheld for, which we initially actually didn't plan too much of. But there were some scenes where we were just watching the energy of what was on set, and we were like, yeah, we got to go handheld here. But we were careful about when we chose that. And actually, since you're such a huge Fincher fan, I don't think we're spoiling too much if we say there's a murder in the movie, because it's called American Murder. But in that big sequence where there's an armored truck heist and all of that, I didn't have tons of time for that. We really looked at like 7 and the shootout in the rain, which is one of the most beautiful, bleak sequences.
Yeah.
Where the gun comes down on Brad Pitt, and it's just excellent. And we, Khalil and I noticed that sequence, if you watch it slowly and break down every shot in it, uses handheld, Steadicam, and dolly.
Oh,
right?
wow.
Fincher is normally not someone who does a ton of movements. He keeps it pretty locked down.
Yeah.
But that sequence uses all of it. And we did that in The Murder, because handheld, Steadicam, and dolly all mean different things. Dolly we love because it's controlled, and really nothing looks as good as the dolly, in my opinion. But Steadicam kind of gives you that flowy, fun, like that Scorsese or David O. Russell like feel, right? Like things are kind of flowy and fun and moving. And then handheld, I think, is great to make someone uncomfortable, or give that. So not always used for that, but a lot of the time it can be. So we in the big climactic murder sequence, we used that, and SWAT invasion too, we did that as well. But we were constantly talking references and looks, and there were many movies that inspired this film's look. But the big thing, and what I love about Khalil as a cinematographer, is she's really into she really thinks about character and story, and lets that enhance the visuals. So, it's always about what's the progression of Jason? What's the progression of Lance Ryan's character? Where are they? How are they meeting? How are we contrasting? And that's why I love working with her.
I hate to go back to what we were talking about before, but I just thinking about all the shots and what you've just said there, I did notice with Tom's performance at the beginning, he's having, obviously, as you say, a lot of fun. And his performance, there's a lot of moments in that are really like cheeky, funny, like his charisma's coming across and everything else. It must have been a very fine line, because obviously this is all based on a real person, and a person that has done something that is absolutely horrendous. I don't want to give away what, for those of you who haven't seen it, but how did you find that line? Like you're really on side with him at the beginning, and he is a likable but slightly scary character that just slowly falls down the rabbit hole. But it felt like a really natural progression. How did you keep tabs on that and making sure that it wasn't either too much or not enough, and also keeping in mind it's a real person as well?
Right. No, and you ask very good questions. That's a smart one. I think that, look, the design of the movie, because the first drafts of the script before my producers came on, right, that I was kicking around on my own, were actually not quite like the movie you saw, in that it was a lot of the same plot elements, but it was actually much more just with Jason and, not really leaving him. And my idea was, take a charismatic guy, stick the audience with him, watch him do something horrendous, and then make you be stuck with him. That was kind of my original idea. And that stayed more or less, but I think the original version was a little bit too much like, straight, pure concentrate, right? It was like this thing that it was kind of unpalatable. And as I developed it, what I realized was the way to really make this story work was to show Jason from all of these different perspectives and points of view. So you do have some scenes that are like that original script where it's just with Jason and you're with him and you're in his head, right? And you're seeing things through his eyes and you're staying with him. But adding that kind of like engine of you have Lance, you have Ryan's character chasing him down, trying to bring him to justice, right? Bring the bad guy in. And we know he did something, but we don't know what. So we're kind of like, you're asking questions, and then you're seeing him through all these different points of view, right? So, and I don't think the movie worked without that. Because you have from Adina's perspective, right? He's the love interest. He's kind of the hero. He's the romantic hero in that storyline. And then you look at him from Chantel's, the sister's point of view. I think she's an excellent actress, and she sees him kind of change over the years, from like her little kid brother who's innocent to the guy he became. And then you have his brother, kind of like, this is a paternal relationship in a lot of ways. He looks after him, he cares for Jason. So I think it was seeing him through. And then you have, of course, Jacki Weaver, his mother, who can see right through his bullshit, right? And that's, in a way, that's the con man's worst nightmare. It's probably there's an argument that's the most tense scene of the movie.
It's a brilliant scene, yeah.
It's really, thank you. It's really tense because, she sees right through him, and it's uncomfortable, because that's not how we're used to seeing him from, especially what comes before that in the film, right? It's like a lot of him having fun on top of the world, and then, comes crashing down fast. So that was always the idea, Elliot, was to really show Jason from all of these different perspectives, so that by the end of the movie, whether and I'm glad to hear you were on his side. Not everyone is. Some people, when they watch it, don't feel that. Some people hate him from the get-go. But I've found people actually, like, whether they love him, hate him, or kind of fall anywhere in between, they can still come on the ride. Because there's someone you can relate to in this, I think. Even if it's not Jason, because most of us are not, thankfully, like Jason Dereck Brown, right? Like, the guy who you see his video of him showing up, right? I mean, he was kind of like, in many ways, I always saw him as an influencer right before the thing existed, the way he videotaped himself and put out this image, right? So it's so interesting to see how he, made that image of himself. But, regardless of who you're, how you feel towards Jason in the movie, I think you can come out with an understanding of him. And I think, therefore, whether you root for him or root against him, or find yourself at both. I mean, I'll tell you, when I watched the assembly of the film, when I wrote this thing, as you know, it was like 2 hours and 40 minutes, which I didn't even know how it was possible that we shot that much footage, but it was. And I watched the slow, build to everything. Because, the movie, despite what it looks like, it was a bit of a slow burn, right? It kind of builds, and then boom. And when he does the horrendous thing we're talking about, I'd forgotten. Like, I was watching all this raw stuff, and I just, like, by the time we got there, I was like, oh, that's right, he does that, And I think a lot of people, when they watch it, feel that way, even if they know what he did, which, the audience, I think, is kind of split. A lot of people will not. Most people, I think, will know anything about Jason Dereck Brown. That's a great way to see the movie. It's just coming blind and cold. That's great. I think that might be the most fun. I never got that experience, but
no, that's kind of how I came into it, because I saw the trailer, and then I, like when you watch a trailer, sometimes you pay attention, sometimes you don't. And I had it on, and I was like, and I was doing something else, but then I was like, oh, this looks good. But I didn't quite grasp that it was a true story. So when I got your email and I was going to go ahead and watch it, I thought, I'm not going to watch the trailer again. I'm not going to look it up again. I'm just going to watch it. Because I remember thinking I wanted to watch it. So I'll watch it without kind of looking too much into it. And it was a great way to watch it, because I already knew it was a true story, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I wasn't aware of the actual true events. And I would say, like, for the audience as well, that's a really good way to go in, because he's a very uncomfortable character, but the whole time you think, oh my god, what is this guy going to do? What like, you just don't. It's pulling you each way, and that's one of the beautiful things about the performance as well. He's there's so many uncomfortable scenes in this film with his mom, with the mate that he's trying to convince to get involved in the thing that he does, and there's just so many moments like that. And to touch on, I was just going to say that, like, the performance in Ozark, I can totally see why when you saw that you were like, wait a minute, this is a good fit, because it's got that similar sort of, oh my god, what's he gonna do?
It was
vibe.
it was so immediate for Ozark, because when I was in high school, I wanted to be an actor like all these guys, and I was not very good, but I loved it. I was very passionate about it. I wanted to, like, study it as much as I could. And I took this amazing acting theater class at Carnegie Mellon School in Pittsburgh. That's a great acting school. And there was this teacher there who used to say to us, she was really intense, and she'd go, now, when you go into an audition, they know in the first 5 seconds if you've got it or not. And me and my friends would laugh at me. My actor friends would laugh and be like, what is she talking about? How could they know in 5 seconds? Like, they know after you did your monologue, of course. And I always thought she was kind of crazy, but then I saw Tom in this Ozark moment, and I was like, oh my God, she's right. Because it was literally like a 5-second lightning bolt, boom, effect, where I just saw him and I was like, yeah, this is the guy. Like, I'm normally someone who really takes my time to think about things and all that, but with him, it was just so fast. So once I saw it, it was like, yeah. And, and what you said about uncomfortable scenes and movies, there are 3 films that I think kind of gave birth to this movie. One of them is one of my favorite directors, Shoya Mamura, the film Vengeance is Mine. I saw this movie in the New Beverly Cinema here in LA, which is, for those of you who don't know, Quentin Tarantino's revival theater that he's kept, alive for the last, like, 20 years to help, just so film goers have a place to go. It's an amazing place. They only show 35 millimeter film. And when I first moved out here, I used to go to that theater all the time. I still do, but back then, really all the time. And he showed this movie, and it's a Japanese film about a serial killer who, terrorized a lot of people in Japan, and was a really brutal mass murderer, and was super charismatic, and had a way with people that reminds me of Jason. And the guy's portrayed by Ken Ogata, who's an incredible actor. And this movie had the audience just feeling every emotion. They were laughing at parts, they were crying at parts, they were repulsed at parts, they were all over. And I just walked out of that theater that night. I was like 23, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to do that to an audience. Like, that was cool. That it felt like more like a rock concert than anything else. It just was the movie was so alive and electric. And, like, I couldn't believe this theater, this movie playing at this, made 40 years ago, all of a sudden just had that much, like, panache and could speak to an audience that way. So, I think that I love uncomfortable cinema. One of my favorite filmmakers is Rainer Werner Fassbinder, who famously said, "I fire in all directions." He always liked to, like, throw people off their game and put them on the edge of their seat. I know Fincher's talked about that first time he saw King of comedy every time in the audience. Like, people went like this when he goes into Jerry Lewis's house. So, I love that kind of cinema. I really do. What I strive to do in mine is entertain you, but make you uncomfortable.
There's a fine line, but I love that kind of thing as well. It's just really when you get that experience where you really go on a trip and all variations of emotion, and that's the great thing about cinema as well, being in a room with other people that are reacting as well, and everyone's reacting slightly differently, and a completely different vibe. But not having the cinema for a long time because of everything that's been going on, one of my first big experiences since all of that was Top Gun 2,
Right.
and the experience of that with an audience and all the emotions and all the nostalgia and everything else. It's that kind of thing where you're like, this is what cinema's for. It's getting that reaction out of the audience and having a group experience that is like a ride. It's like a ride.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that I agree with what Tarantino said. That movie played. Tony Scott's one of my favorite filmmakers. I actually was really cool working with Ryan, because I didn't know this till actually recently, but Ryan lived with Tony Scott.
Oh wow, really?
Like he lived in his guest house when he first moved out here, and he was in a Ridley Scott movie too, because Crimson Tide was Ryan's first movie. He had a very small part. But Tony Scott kind of like discovered him and like took him under his wing as a mentor. Apparently he was the nicest guy in the world. That's
wow.
So it's so tragic what happened to him, but he was apparently like the sweetheart director, and Ryan was telling me he was the same thing, that he was just like the nicest guy, and like kind of helped Ryan get on his feet, and looked up to him, and Ryan looked up to him and all of that. But I thought the new Top Gun, I agree, I thought it was awesome. And I was so glad to see it do so well, because that really, I think, proved
unreal.
It is incredible. Theater's not going anywhere, man.
No,
it's going to change and shift, but it's not going anywhere, because people still want that experience. And Top Gun, they did a masterful job. So I concur.
Mathew, I'm gonna have to let you go because I've just realized how much time we've had. But thank you so much, and I really appreciate reaching out, and it's been really interesting. And genuinely, when it comes to seeing someone as yourself who's written a script, he's gotten it off the ground and he's directed it. He hasn't given up and let someone else take over and control the end product. It's fascinating and it's inspiring. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Elliot, thank you for having me. You asked really great questions, which is always nice. People do their research and all that. So thank you so much. I love your podcast, and thank you for helping keep film alive. And we'll come see your movie, and then you'll have me on your podcast as much as you want with my other films.
Well, you're welcome back anytime. It's a real pleasure. Oh, in fact, that reminds me. Can I ask my final question? Most embarrassing moment do you have on set, preferably?
Most embarrassing.
I think Julian's. I'm trying to remember. Julian's was, I think, being late, and then realized there was some sort of scenario with being very late to set.
Does it have to be on American Murder? Or
no, not at all. No.
Okay. I'll give you a good one. On my thesis film Frontman, it was another situation where I had these amazing actors who were definitely well beyond. They were all working TV actors. They were well beyond doing that thesis film, but they kind of came in and helped me. And you when you're finding yourself as a director, you kind of like you talked about earlier, try on different hats, you try on different shirts. I remember having one director who said he would wear hats to set every day. Because kind of an on-set persona forms, right? That might not be fully, you. And I was trying out different directing styles, and I really kind of I think I saw that like David O. Russell and like Hal Ashby apparently, and like Judd Apatow all apparently were very into improv with their actors. They really let the actors go off. They might even shout directions at them. Right, sometimes to the chagrin of them, but they kind of had this fast, loose, wild style, and that's not really my style. I'm pretty deliberate and thought out, but I like allowing improv, but I'm not one to shout over the actors. But anyways, I saw that Judd Apatow did that, and it seemed to work for him, so I tried it, and not shout, but give it run up, try it this way, try it that way. And so I try it with the actress, and I have this guy, and she's playing his father, and I go up to her and I go, the scene is like she's basically saying goodbye to him, like it's a sad scene. And you're not, the character's deaf, so you can't hear what she's saying. So I thought I would tell her, like, I go, tell him, we're going to roll sound anyway. So just tell him, the show was great and whatever. And tell him. And I go, try this. And she's like, she tries it. It's like, I don't go. Now tell him, I whisper in her, tell him you got into Berkeley College, right? But tell him you got into Berkeley College. So I go back behind the thing and we roll it. And she goes like, okay. She's like, nice actress. And she goes, and Dad, I got into Berkeley. And the whole crew, just like the camera operator, goes like this, like, what? Like everyone was so confused. The lead actor just looked and like kind of like also went like, what? Like everyone was just so thrown off. And I go, cut. And everyone's like looking at me confused and like, well, what was that? And I'm just like, I don't know. I tried something. You know what, guys? And you cannot be afraid to try things and fail. And I just tried something and I really failed, but we'll do it back, we'll do it again the normal way. And everyone started laughing and dying. And in front of my lead actor, and I look at him, I go, I have no regrets about that because I tried. And he goes, yeah, no, for sure. Maybe just a little.
Brilliant.
So, I think it's a good story because it's, not be afraid to try things sometimes. But yeah, definitely, you try on hats.
You got to keep trying, and then if it goes wrong, you got to get up again. That's the main name of the game.
Yeah, you keep learning how your style is. I'm learning it, still with this. Like, obviously, I would hope so. If I came out of my first movie and I was like, oh yeah, no, this is how I do things on. But you're always constantly evolving and learning things and doing some stupid stuff. Insecure first-time director things. So. All par for the course. But
Exactly. Well, thank you again, Mathew, and all the best with the movie. It's a really impressive. I mean, it blows my mind that you wrote it, you directed it, and it's your first feature. So, all the best with it, man.
Brother, thank you. Oh, can we just before we head off, can we just tell people where to see it?
Yeah, of course.
Or
go
do you
ahead.
do that later?
Yeah.
So I assume most of your listeners are in America. I don't know.
All over actually. Yeah, we've got a bit of a mixture. Yeah. Okay.
Well, so this episode dropping soon. American Murder will be available October 21st in select theaters in the U.S. And it'll be streaming and on digital demand platforms on October 28th. And for international folks, they'll be coming later, early 2023.
Brilliant. Great. Thanks, man.
Elliot,
really
thank you so much for making this work. I really appreciate it. This is a great podcast you run, so
thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
I'll keep listening.
Thank you, man. Take care. Bye.
Thank you to our guest, Mathew. American Murderer is out now. If you enjoyed this episode, please review and share this podcast. It makes a huge difference. We're also on Patreon, TikTok, Instagram, if you'd like to support us and get more content. Thank you.
It's Alive and Fail, and you better come back next month to Alive and Fail, to Alive and Fail.